Hello, you guys. So I got to see the early fan screening of Dune 2 last night, and I absolutely loved it. It's probably the best movie I've ever seen, in my opinion, and it's definitely the best book adaptation that I think I've ever witnessed. At least that I can think of off the top of my head. So I have a lot to say, so let's get into it. I have my notes here. So, stuff I liked about this movie. This movie was fantastic. I feel like it's a very, very long movie. It's like 3 hours in total by the time that you've, sat down and watched the trailers and the entire movie. But I feel like they did a really, really good job with the pacing and with being able to fit everything in this massive story into, a short runtime. The action in this movie was absolutely epic, and I really loved it compared to the books, because I feel like in the books, the battle at the end of the book just doesn't really feel that climactic to me. I really like the overall narrative and philosophy of the Dune books. However, I don't necessarily vibe with Frank Herbert's writing style. I feel like his writing kind of leaves a lot to be desired in terms of my personal preferences, and I feel like he can kind of like gloss over things sometimes or portray them in a way that's too kind of high up and omniscient, where we don't really get into the weeds of the character's thoughts sometimes. I don't know if I'm necessarily explaining that right, but I do really like the way that they approached the action in this. Paul is actually like a very kind of terrifying figure as you see his rise in becoming Muad'Dib. The fight sequences between him and all the Harkonnen forces and the spice harvesters and all of that was really, really fantastic and pulse pounding, and they did a really, really good job portraying all of that. And things were elevated to an even higher degree with the battle at the very end. It was kind of quick, I will say, and I do wish that we got a bit more kind of struggle between the two forces in the end of the movie, because I do feel like certain kind of victories came a little bit too easily. However, the runtime kind of really explains it, and it was still extremely satisfying in my opinion. Something that I absolutely loved seeing was the sandworms. Seeing them being ridden on screen was absolutely incredible. It's something that I've kind of always wanted to see depicted, and seeing Paul's first worm ride was fantastic, and seeing the worms being ridden into battle at the end of the movie was also absolutely incredible. I can't imagine doing that in real life. Just having to run up to it and just jump and pray that you land and don't get squashed or drowned in the sand. That was very, very cool. Something that I also really liked about this movie that I wasn't quite expecting was the movie actually got a lot of laughs, which I wouldn't have suspected before going into the movie. But there were a lot of scenes, specifically with Stilgar and a few with Zendaya, that had the whole theater chuckling, which I actually really, really appreciated. We see throughout the movie how Stilgar's belief in Paul as being this messiah figure, the Lisan al-Gaib, his belief is just so deep and sincere that he tends to kind of delude himself and convince himself of things. And we did get a lot of chuckles out of that. There's a scene where Paul specifically says, I'm not your messiah. And Stilgar's like, well, of course he would say that. He's humble and modest. And that was just really, really great. Javier Bardem, is that his name? He did a really, really good job in this role as well. I really, really bought his performance as Stilgar, and I really appreciated seeing the Fremen culture throughout this movie. I feel like they did a really, really good job at portraying the Fremen as, people indigenous to this land who truly know its ways. And I liked seeing the kind of different sects or different kind of political ideologies and entities kind of battling within this culture. Because in the South there are a bunch of religious fundamentalists, but Zendaya and her friends are kind of younger and leftists and don't really believe in this prophecy. And they feel like if they want a free Arrakis, they have to, engage in kind of emancipation and liberation action by themselves without relying on some kind of white savior figure to come and deliver them from this oppression that they've been dealing with for centuries, millennia. at the hands of the Harkonnen and the Empire, is the performances in this movie were absolutely fantastic. I feel like Timmy did a fantastic job portraying Paul's kind of descent into this kind of religious messiah figure that he's fighting against. Something I also really liked was Jessica's role in this movie. I've read the books a couple times, and I don't quite remember how this goes, but I feel like in this movie, they really kind of elevated Jessica's role in crafting Paul into this messiah figure. She is a lot more manipulative in this adaptation, and I feel like she is kind of the driving force behind this coming jihad that Paul is scared of committing. So I feel like her power in this movie kind of really elevated the stakes and the kind of emotional weight of what's going on. I also absolutely loved Zendaya in this movie. I love her in basically everything I've ever seen her in, and she did a really good job portraying Chani, in my opinion. I really liked how much chemistry she really had with Timmy in this movie. I feel like I actually really believed the relationship when I didn't quite believe it that much when I was actually reading the books. They have a lot of chemistry together, and I feel like they, would like actually be friends in real life, based off of how they interacted in this movie. And I really liked the way that Chani really believed in Paul. However, she was really conflicted about the prophecies and the whole religion surrounding him, because she disagrees with the fundamentalists and suspects or knows that these prophecies were made by the Bene Gesserit to control people. Wow, that goes on for so long. She seems to know or suspect that these prophecies were created by the Bene Gesserit to control and manipulate her people. And so she's kind of fighting against this whole prophecy as the movie goes along, and feels a lot of conflict in terms of Paul's kind of choices and motivations. She's definitely at odds with Jessica, more so than I remember in the books, and I liked seeing that dynamic between the two of them. Also, Austin Butler did a fantastic job portraying Fade Rautha. He was extremely creepy in this movie, and I really liked the way that he was able to kind of imitate Baron Harkonnen's voice. He did a really good job with that, and I definitely bought his performances because he was a really terrifying figure throughout the movie. I really liked seeing the scenes on Gadi Prime, and I was really interested in seeing how they kind of focus more attention on the plots of the Bene Gesserit in this movie, with Lady Fenring and her interactions with Fade Rautha and, the genetic breeding program and all of that. I really enjoyed getting to see Florence Pugh and Christopher Walken as Emperor Shaddam IV and Princess Irulan. I feel like they did a really good job, but I do wish that we had gotten a little bit more of the Emperor prior to his arrival in Arrakis. Now, let's get into some of my criticisms. One thing I will mention that sounds a little bit silly, honestly, but I would potentially recommend at least bringing a pair of sunglasses with you. Arrakis is a desert planet, so it's super bright, but we do get a lot of scenes that go from dark inside the sieges and whatnot, that go from dark to like blindingly bright, and that quick change between scenes, the light was like piercing my eyes, and by the end of the movie I did admittedly have a headache, and so did the friend that I went with, just from the changes in brightness, I suppose. And so it sounds kind of stupid, but you just might want to bring those just in case. So the first thing that I'll mention that I'm kind of on the fence about, but in this movie, Aaliyah doesn't appear. She's not born, which on one hand I think is a good choice, because I feel like if you don't know, like if you haven't read the books, Jessica gets pregnant, and when she becomes a Reverend Mother, as a Bene Gesserit, and as Reverend Mothers do, they gain all of the memories of their female ancestors. But because she's pregnant, this also happens to Aaliyah as well, even though she's a fetus. And she is basically born as a baby with the mind of, a full adult who has hundreds or thousands of years of memories. And so she is kind of deemed a creepy abomination by everyone when she's born, because she's just far too mature for her age. And so I feel like depicting that in the movie could have came across as like goofy or been really, really weird. I feel like we would have got like a Twilight or Renesmee situation that just would have been like creepy and uncanny and off-putting. So I do feel like it was kind of a good choice not to include her. But on the other hand, if he had found a way to include her that actually felt real and felt creepy, I feel like that would have been incredible. That's something that I do admittedly want to see. So I'm kind of conflicted about that. But what he does instead that I think is smart is, even though she's not born yet, Aaliyah and Jessica actually communicate, while she's in utero. And so we do get a lot of scenes throughout the movie of Jessica kind of speaking with Aaliyah and hatching her manipulative plans. And Aaliyah even talks to Paul through Jessica at certain points, which I think is a good way to kind of depict her influence on the story without having to actually have her present and born and be this creepy, uncanny, like CGI abomination. Another criticism that I have is I feel like we should have seen more of Paul's visions in more detail. My friend hasn't read the book, she's not familiar with Dune whatsoever, and so I feel like she was kind of a little bit confused about what his real fears were about the future. And because I've read the books, I know about the jihad, and it is mentioned throughout the movies, but the visions that we get don't feel dire enough to kind of really warrant his reaction to them. I wish that what we'd seen in his visions had been more genuinely horrifying, so that we got a deeper sense of why he's avoiding this fate so much. And so that is one criticism that I have, but it didn't really detract from my enjoyment of the movie very much. Another criticism that I have is once Paul goes through with the Water of Life, he switches immediately, and I do understand why that would happen, but I do wish that we'd gotten just maybe a couple more scenes of him kind of battling with his previous plans and ideology prior to gaining all the memories of his ancestors and now being able to see this path forward. That switch just happened so quickly that it felt a little bit odd to me. But given the runtime, I understand why you'd make that choice. In terms of some of the anticlimactic is too strong of a word, but in some of the scenes that didn't feel fully satisfying to me, one example that I have is Gurney's revenge at the end of the movie, and same with the death of one of the antagonists. I don't want to necessarily spoil stuff if you haven't read the books, so I'm trying to be vague. But just some of those scenes where certain antagonists were defeated just felt a little bit too easy to me, but that's fine. Another thing that I really, really enjoyed was the ending of the movie. The one thing that I also really, really enjoyed is the very end of the movie, although I do have one small critique. Kind of two of the final scenes are one of Jessica kind of speaking to camera, basically, and declaring a holy war. And I thought that would be a perfect place to end it, because it really kind of ends on a cliffhanger and sets up the third movie, Dune Messiah, to hopefully come out in a couple of years. And so I feel like that would have been the perfect place to stop it. But instead, there's one more scene after that, including Zendaya, and it just kind of felt odd and out of place. I wish that they just kind of switched that order so that we'd ended on more of a kind of foreboding note with the Jessica declaring this jihad against everyone. And so there is that. But I did really, really like that that's how the movie basically ended. I feel like that is a really good way to set up the future movies. I think it's just going to be a trilogy. I don't know if he's planning to adapt any further than that. But even so, I feel like Dune Messiah brings about a great end to Paul's story, which makes sense. And adapting Leto into his sandworm form would be kind of odd to see on screen, I think. And I think the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the sets and the world building. This movie, I feel, does an even better job than the first movie in terms of all of the kind of locations and visuals and the machinery and technology that we see in this world. Whoever the concept artists were for this movie did an absolutely fantastic job at making this world feel just so real and lived in and vivid, in my opinion. They did a really, really good job creating the different kinds of technology that exist in this world without, computers and AIs. And so that was really, really fantastic. And all the locations that they created were incredible as well. I loved seeing inside of the Sieges and the shots that we got at Gaiety Prime with the Harkonnens were absolutely incredible. All of the architecture that they have there is just so kind of like brutalist and foreboding and creepy, and it matches their aesthetic perfectly. They did a really good job with all the aesthetics of all the different peoples throughout this movie, and it's just incredible. One thing that I will note is there are a couple characters missing. First of all is Thufir Hawat. He's just not included in this movie whatsoever. And the second one is Count Fenring. That is one thing that I wish that we'd had. I don't really mind the absence of Thufir, but seeing Count Fenring in this movie would have been a fantastic idea, and it would have explored or gotten to show more of what mentats really do in this world and what they're used for, because we just kind of barely get a passing explanation of their role in the first movie. And so seeing more of them in the second movie would have been great, and seeing how he is a friend to the Emperor and a mentat assassin would have done a fantastic job at kind of just building up this world more and more. But overall, this movie was absolutely fantastic. It is the best adaptation I've ever seen, and I think it has now cemented its spot as my favorite movie ever. I'm definitely gonna go get tickets and probably see it like 2 or 3 more times at theaters, honestly, because I just loved it that much. The action in this movie was absolutely incredible. Everything about the movie looked fantastic. The performances were great, and I really don't have any like serious complaints about this movie. This is the most pumped and most stoked I've ever been to watch a movie. It was basically vibrating before I got to the theater, and I'm so glad that the movie lived up to my insanely high expectations. So I highly recommend that you go and buy tickets, and let me know your thoughts on the movie when you see it. With that said, that's all that I'm going to talk about today. But I do want to mention that I am filming a review for the Netflix Avatar adaptation, and I was just wondering whether you guys would prefer one really long video going over all 8 episodes, or if I should split it into 2 and cover the first 4 episodes and the last 4 episodes separately. I have a lot to say about that show, so be on the lookout for that video. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Bye.